It's a fascinating panel. I'm so glad that I'm a part of this. I hope I'm audible to everyone. Okay, excellent. So we have some three very, very interesting papers. So as was mentioned by the Destiny, we'll we'll allow the speakers to go first, 15 minutes each, and at the end we can collect the questions and address those to the speakers when they complete their papers. So if we could just quickly crack on without wasting any more time. So we can start alphabetically with perhaps Jaya Sarkar, followed by Neha Jain, and then Shreya Sharma. So Jaya's paper is really interesting. It is entitled Visible Reality in a Pandemic, Interrogating Biopolitics Through Contagion and Peter May's Lockdown. We're looking forward to it. So Jaya, if you're ready, you can start the session.
Just give me a minute to present the screen. Is the screen visible now?
It is indeed, yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm properly audible. So the title of my presentation is Visible Reality in a Pandemic, Interrogating Biopolitics Through Contagion in Peter May's novel Lockdown. My presentation examines Peter May's crime novel Lockdown to explain how a bioengineered virus cripples London and results in a crime, the denouement of which reveals a nefarious capitalist purpose that is a stark reflection of the world we live in. The plan to use an artificially engineered virus as a bioweapon to profit wreaks havoc in London, resulting in several deaths, fear, panic, civil disorder, a spike in crime, and a string of anarchy throughout the city. While countries worldwide were battling the coronavirus crisis, a few people and organizations seek their benefit during adversity. Criminal organizations and corrupt government officials frequently seek innovative methods to retain their illegitimate wealth and power. Simultaneously, entrenched malfeasance along with crime and violence make countering the mounting menace even more challenging for governments. Scottish novelist Peter May's Lockdown, a crime thriller about an inadvertent exposure to a pandemic exacerbated by an H5N1 bird flu virus, draws parallel between the COVID-19 virus and his portrayal of the bird flu virus, with the inclusion of the crimes committed during these outbreaks of the virus. Peter May explains in the foreword to his novel that he wrote this story back in 2005, but the UK publishers rejected it as they were unable to envision a hypothetical situation where a virus might put the entire city of London on a lockdown. In 2020, as the world began to battle the lethal COVID-19, May understood that what he envisaged 15 years ago had become a reality, and he resubmitted his novel to the publishers. As a result, the novel was released in April 2020 and provided its readers with an engrossing narrative about a murder and the civil unrest that ensues when the city of London is quarantined. The novel delves into the nuanced complexity of a pandemic and a city on lockdown, capturing the interest of general readers who may see parallels between the narrative and their own lived reality. The upheavals in the narrative exhibit an alarming resemblance to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the biopolitics and crime surrounding the flu virus in the novel become a possibility worth pondering for readers in these circumstances. In the early days of COVID-19, conspiracy theories were doing the rounds about how the coronavirus was stolen from a laboratory in Canada and then was mutated in a state-owned Wuhan virology laboratory in China, and how the pandemic was the consequence of a leak in that laboratory. Although there are no scientific shreds of evidence to support those claims and the rumors died on their own, the very possibility of such an occurrence becomes the source of fear. In May's novel, a virus bioengineered in the laboratory of the pharmaceutical company Steen France results in a pandemic in London. The virus is used as a biopower by Steen France, owned by Dr. Roger Bloom, to achieve the expected results from the social order. Foucault particularly uses the phrase biopower to apply to public health practices as well as other control mechanisms, and he uses the term to refer to an explosion of numerous and diverse techniques for achieving the subjugation of bodies and the control of populations. In lockdowns, Steen Franks uses exactly this model of biopower to manufacture a pandemic and deliberately devises an economic and political problem to earn money by selling an already produced vaccine called flu kill. Biopower exerts control over big groups of individuals through an anatomopolitics of the human body and biopolitics of the population via socially sanctioned institutions. By using biopolitics to regulate and affect millions of biological lives, Bloom, in May's novel, becomes an instigator of bioterrorism. His influence on public health gives him a political medical grip over an entire population, and he combines medicine and public health into a capitalist agenda. He admits that when the first case of the bird flu have been reported, it is expected that the virus will change into a human flu virus and cause a pandemic. As a result, the World Health Organization declared flu kill as the appropriate drug for such a pandemic. Bloom receives billions of dollars in Western orders and starts to develop a new production site in France. But when people start killing millions of the infected birds, the threat fades away. When flu kill was no longer required, governments all over the world suddenly decided that they had other priorities for the money they had earmarked for the flu kill vaccine. Orders were cancelled, others never materialized. Steen Franks was all but finished. As a result, Bloom decides to manufacture a pandemic using a bioengineered virus in order to generate demand for the vaccine. And it appears that the fundamental mechanism of neoliberal capitalism functions as a barrier to any intervention against this lethal virus. Out of their capitalist greed, Bloom and his company artificially create a version of the H5N1 bird flu virus, which is supposed to transmit easily between people. To put his plan into action, Bloom proceeds to buy a 10-year-old Chinese girl named Choi from the international marketplace and adopts her under the fake name of Mr. Walter Smith. He then injects her with the bioengineered virus and sends her on a school excursion at Sprintwater Outdoor Center, where she passes on the virus unwittingly to many people. This decision of Steen Franks' authorities to spread the virus through kids is mainly because their incubation period is typically between 1 and 3 days, and the average person will infect 1 out of every 4 people. Children are capable of more, and in enclosed communities, they spread the infection like wildfire. Within months, the virus starts to infect the entire city of London, which is in desperate need of a vaccine. Bloom's audacious idea to create a massive market for vaccines succeeds, And he becomes a grim executioner of a biopolitical strategy where the virus becomes the source of bioterrorism. Bloom makes his bioengineered virus of the bird flu virus from the already available virus. He uses Choi as a carrier to infect a susceptible population within months. And then once she has served her purpose, Bloom mercilessly kills her. When the forensic experts finds this out, they mentions that this time Bloom made a bigger killing than they expected. Millions of people are going to die because somehow, somewhere along the way, Steen Frank screwed up. And Choi would have been the living proof of it. Destroy her, you destroy the evidence. Choi in the novel is chosen to be the carrier of the virus by Bloom primarily because of her disability, a cleft palate which caused substantial disfigurement. Bloom says, in fact, we bought her in the international marketplace. It's amazing how cheaply people can be bought these days, literally. And children with such disfigurement, well, they cost pennies. Because of Choi's disability, Bloom gains the opportunity to inscribe authorities on her body in an unfavorable and degrading manner, constricting, limiting, and restricting her liberty and prospects for a brighter future in the city. Steenfranks did not expect the virus to become the source of a pandemic, and when it did, they were left with no other option than to kill Choi. Bloom thinks that he can use his already manufactured vaccine flu kill once the market demands it. But in the meantime, the virus has mutated again, and flu kill no longer works as the appropriate vaccine for the virus. Bloom fails to imagine that the mutated form of the bird flu virus would not fall within the compass of the vaccine he has already produced. The way viruses transform and mutate is very difficult to comprehend and is not always according to the rules. It often points out the fact that viruses do not function in compliance with the already laid out scientific laws and principles. Foucault's panopticon form of control arising from political strategies is represented in May's novel. People are no longer rejected but are assigned specific places for close observations in London, and hereby assigning individual disciplinary structures, the process of surveillance can work smoothly. The heavily guarded streets, the checkpoints, and the dome where the infected patients are kept allude to Foucault's description of the confinement. In Discipline and Punish, Foucault presents his renowned concept of panopticism by outlining disciplinary mechanisms developed in the late 17th century to regulate plagues. The gaze of inspection ensures the absolute obedience of the people, and this allows the authorities to closely monitor the movements of each citizen and constantly locate and examine their intentions in the city. The quarantine of Londoners in May's novel indicates the establishment of a regimented society around a comprehensive set of techniques and mechanisms for monitoring, controlling, and rectifying the aberrant in the public space. With the growing contagion, citizens do not resist to the lockdown and willingly succumbs, and they remain inside their houses following the state's lockdown regulations. The novel demonstrates how London becomes the epicenter of the virus that eventually leads the city to a motionless and frozen state. The daily activities have been disrupted as a result of the lockdown, and the streets are empty. Airport, train stations, highways are closed, and no movements are authorized except for medical emergencies and those required to maintain law and order. When the police investigator McNeil drives through the city, he notices how the once thriving metropolis has developed into a ghost town, and he also expresses concern about the impoverished individuals who would suffer financial hardship as a result of this lockdown in the city. This dread of infection and death compels residents of London to remain in their homes during the lockdown. By publishing the novel in April 2020, Peter May makes it possible for the readers to relate to the novel instantly. The outbreak of the bird flu virus and the consequent lockdown in London have become a visible reality in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The narrative experience of the novel blends with the reality, and it becomes considerably difficult to distinguish when the characters become part of the reality. And the bird flu pandemic in the novel becomes the COVID-19 pandemic. The novel is particularly pertinent in light of the current state of dialectics concerning the COVID-19 and its resulting consequences on human social behavior. May's novel moves away from the fictionalized viral thriller genre and into an articulation of lived experiences owing to the virus's evolutionary patterns and uncertainties about the efficacy of the vaccines produced. The genre of crime narratives in general works towards destabilizing the boundaries between the real and the imaginary. The way May presents the lockdown in the city of London with its lawlessness, surveillance, the citizens being reduced to docile bodies, and the rising crime rate seems to be accurate to the lockdown scenario during the COVID-19 pandemic. People adhere to the guidelines of the lockdown in the fear of getting infected by the virus. And similar to May's novel, containment zones were erected to keep the potential contaminators from spreading the virus. Similar to the novel, during the COVID-19 lockdowns, the streets were deserted, people needed certain passes to travel within the cities, and the sirens of the ambulances were usual occurrences. Peter May's novel inadvertently shades light on the uncertainties about another wave of the COVID-19 pandemic and stresses on the fact that in the post-COVID era, a new life under viral conditions has to be invented, and as a result, what is fiction and what is reality will change. Written nearly 15 years ago, this prophetic and gripping fiction explores human experiences amid a deadly virus and gives a gateway to the envision of the post-COVID world. Um, so here ends my presentation. Thank you everyone for listening to me. Thank you, Dr. Parui, and thank you, the organizer, for giving me this opportunity to present today.
Thank you very much, Jaya. That was absolutely fascinating. And I have a couple of things in my mind as well. Thanks for your presentation, which I will reserve for the end. But we'll move on quickly to Neha Jain, who's got a paper which sounds equally fascinating, which is titled Eliciting Non-Human Memory, Contagions and Contingencies in Albert Camus' The Plague, and Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police. So Neha, if you're ready, you could begin your presentation. If you have a screen share, you can go ahead and share it, please.
So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present my ideas here. And now I'll just move on to sharing the screen. 1 second. Is it visible now?
Should be in a second. Yeah, it is now. Please go ahead.
It is. Okay. So, yeah. My paper is entitled Eliciting Non-Human Memory, Contagions and Contingencies in Albert Camus' The Plague and Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police. So the idea of contagion has been very prevalent in literature and in movies and popular imagination for a while now. We start with Daniel Defoe's The Journal of the Plague Year, and then we have somewhere in between this, around 1947, La Peste by Albert Camus was published. So it was before Greybeard. Greybeard also explores this apocalyptic contagion of fear where humankind is dying out because it's massively sterile. And then this was also explored by Frank Herbert in his book, The White Plague, where he talks about women exclusively being affected by a plague which is being spread by men. And as a result, humankind dies out. You may know Frank Herbert because of his series Dune, which is very popular on Netflix these days. We also have, we cannot forget, Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which has captured the popular imagination, and to the extent that it has become a costume for Halloween parties, and women here are reduced to their reproductive state. In each of these scenarios, as the previous presenter pointed out, we are talking about a totalitarian regime and the whole surveiller idea by Michel Foucault that your movements are being not only captured but also moderated by an all-seeing entity. So We also have the idea of contagion in popular myths and lores. If you know about Rakta Bij, the story goes that it was a demon who could not be slayed by the gods because whenever you tried to slay him, each drop of blood, it transmuted itself into a new demon. And they say that Kali was incarnated, and here we have a woman who drinks up the entire disease and contagion, which is embodied by the idea of Rakta Bij. So here she is a woman who's swallowing the contagion, but on the other end of the spectrum, you have the famous Pandora's box. So here there's a woman who's responsible for opening that box which contains death and destruction and plague, and somehow it's always intertwined with the very enigmatic nature of knowledge and its duality, and how it's always entwined with evil. Here we have a Venetian etching which is entitled Les sciences qui éclairent l'esprit de l'homme, or sciences which enlighten man. And the snakes here, they are an ancient symbol of wisdom. And they also go back to the myth of Medusa and so on and so forth. Then this goes on in movies. P.D. James' Children of Men was made into a movie, and then there was Steven Soderbergh's Contagion. And as soon as the pandemic hit, people went back in droves to this movie and the book by Camus, La Peste. And Handmaid's Tale has already gained, say, 15 Emmy nominations and awards. And in this paper, we are concerned with Camus' La Peste and Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police. And The Memory Police was originally published in 1993, and the title was Hisoyaka Nakesho. It's one of the leading works in narrative as counter memory. So this paper, it seeks to explore, compare the perspectives of the East and the West, the masculine and feminine authors through the works of Camus and Ogawa, which are underscored by themes of conformity, ecological crisis, and on rare occasions, a hope for renewal. So for this presentation, I'll give a brief summary of the primary sources, and then the first part of the paper deals with contagion or fear in the context of a totalitarian regime. The second part of the paper deals with ecological crisis, which is highlighted in both these works and deals with the contingencies of a post-pandemic society. As a synthesis, the paper offers memory, an antidote to isolation, tribal society, and extinction. And we have referred largely to works of Andrew T. Price Smith, Contagion and Chaos, and Nikolai Kwaposov's Memory Wars. So Ogawa's work is situated in a fictional island where you have no possibility of locating yourself. So I cite maps themselves having long since been disappeared. So this is a form which she uses throughout the book, the verb to be disappeared, as if it was something given to be disappeared. No one knows its precise shape or exactly what lies on the other side of the mountains. And Camus' work is also located in the nondescript city of Oran, somewhere in the tropics of Africa. So he says, comment faire imaginer par exemple, so I'll just translate to English. How do you picture, for instance, a city without pigeons, without trees or gardens, where winged creatures don't flutter, nor do leaves rustle? A place which is simply neutral. So years down the line, this crisis of living creatures being lost are what constitute the incipit of Ogawa's work. So she also writes from an insular nation, we must remember. So she writes, I cite, long before you were born, there were many things here. My mother used to tell me when I was still a child. Transparent things, fragrant things, fluttery ones, bright ones, wonderful things you can't possibly imagine. And this loss through time and space, it was already documented in the thoughts of Camus' protagonist, Dr. Rio, although it was exclusively in the context of Western history. So I cite Athens, plagued and devoid of birds, cities in China full of silent agony, the swimmers of Marseille dumping corpses in slippery graves, the construction of the wall in Provence supposed to bar the furious winds that carried the plague. Beggars, humid and soiled beds on the earthen floors of Constantinople, patients being carried in hammocks, the carnival of masked medicine men during the Black Death, the copulation of the living upon the gravestones in Milan, the carts full of the dead in London, the horror filling the days and the nights, the endless cries of people. No, all of this was not enough to break the peace of today. So Camus is talking about this collective denial that the society goes into because of the heightened rates of fear and anxiety. So this has also been noted by the political scientist Andrew T. Price Smith, and he talks about the psychological impacts of a novel pathogen. According to him, it generates great uncertainty and inhibits risk assessment. And I cite, uncertainty and fear result in suboptimal decision making, which may in turn result in very real damage to a country's material interests. So sometimes this is deliberate, this choice that we make to deny the reality, and this is noted by Ogawa, by her protagonist, because in her novel, The Memory Police wipes out concepts one by one, and with that goes all the objects related to it. For example, on the day that the memory police will decide that roses are no longer relevant to human existence, or maybe books or words or language, that very day that entire notion is disappeared from the memory of the protagonist. So here she talks about roses in particular. And I cite, I wandered across the hill as though walking through a cemetery of unmarked graves. In years past, I had carefully studied the stems, leaves, and branches and had read the tags that identified the different varieties. But I realize now that I was already unable to remember what this thing called a rose had looked like. That's the end of the citation. And in this uniform death of memory, which is spreading like chloroform, it's reinforced in the next passage on the population, and I cite, already on the second day, people who had raised roses in their gardens came to the river to lay their petals to rest. They carefully dismantled the flowers petal by petal and slipped them quietly into the stream. So she marks upon the population, which is divided into those who are conforming and those who are unable to conform. So the protagonist's mother was one of these people who had this surprising trait that she could not forget the things which they were supposed to, and she was persecuted for that. So her current guardian, he's worried about her survival, and he imposes this forgetfulness on her because she's worried about, let's say, the profession of the rose gardener now. So I cite, that's nothing for you to worry yourself over. Maybe some other flower will bloom there, or they'll plant fruit trees or turn it into a graveyard. No one knows and no one needs to know. Time is a great healer. It just flows on all of its own accord. He can just forget about tending roses with so many other things to occupy him, cleaning his grandchildren's ears, etc. So the writings of Camus and Ogawa, they illustrate Korpasov's declaration that the rise of memory, the decline of faith in the objectivity of historical knowledge, and the crumbling of global history were an interdependent phenomenon. They also avert the reader that these circumstances, they beget the ideal breeding grounds for the contagion of fear. And one of the other things that I'd like to note is that the reader wonders about the abstraction of the contagion in Ogawa's work, where memories simply erase themselves. Notions are disappeared without the graphic descriptions of a very real bubonic plague, which is outlined in Camus' work. This progression across time is outlined by Kopasov in how certain historians imagined the new past in the 1960s as a rational construction produced by objective historical research, which is evident in the linear progression of Camus' work on the contagion. On the other hand, later in time, Ogawa's writing demonstrates Kopasov's observation that this past is being generated and consumed in the age of memory. He marks this age of memory somewhere around the end of 1970s and characterizes it as being no less biased and far more fragmented than the master narratives which had structured the old past. So this is played out not only in their narratives but also in the global political developments. And I cite Kopasov. In a way, its fragmentation has even increased the likelihood of it being used for the purpose of political manipulation. End of the citation. The second part of the paper deals with the after effects of the contagion, and one of the first ones is the isolation of human beings from one another, and then secondary is their isolation from the nature around them. So here Camus talks about this old man who had tried to reach out to a character before attempting suicide, and the character is regretful. So I cite, "It was bizarre that he wanted to engage in a conversation, but I was working." And then Ogawa, she goes on in her work when she talks about the erasure of the notion of postal stamps. So I cite, the mother's talking to the protagonist because she remembers them. "This one is thin and small, but it's important. When you had something you wanted to tell someone, you would write it down on a piece of paper and paste this stamp on it. Then they would deliver it for you anywhere at all, but that was a long time ago." So, Hannah Arendt, she has already noted that if people could not preserve their past interactions with other human beings, they would be doomed to appear in the world for a fleeting moment and then disappear again in a never-ending cycle. This has also been very beautifully noted by Professor Avishek Parui in his work, Culture and the Literary Matter, Metaphor, Memory, which I encourage you to read. And I cite, "If culture may be read as a contagious and controlled economy of codes, which are furthered by effective as well as effective instruments, the role of remembering becomes key in the process of production and preservation." So Camus' writing, it gives us an exoskeleton of the missing essentials. And it is the perspective of Ogawa which brings us to these little threads that are essential to connecting people in everyday gestures. It's essentially a feminine perspective. She talks about this pair of gloves which were knit for a child by his mother. And this family is about to be persecuted because they remember things. So I cite, "His plain light blue gloves had obviously been knit by hand. They were connected to each other with a strand of yarn to keep them from becoming separated. I remembered wearing the same kind long ago, and in this basement so full of anxiety, they seemed like the lone sign of innocence and peace." End of the citation. So apart from this, both of the works, they note the disappearance of flora and fauna, because in the case of Camus, the plague began with the death of rats. They used to bleed to death. And
So Neha, if I could just intervene, can you wind up in another couple of minutes, maybe?
Yeah, I will do that. And Gava, she talks about how birds, they were disappearing, and I had noted it there. And since her father was an ornithologist, so as soon as the notion of birds was wiped out, so was wiped out every memory regarding her father in the protagonist. So I would like to conclude that this with the idea that Arendt gives us, that this earth alienation is accompanied by world alienation of individuals from each other. Thus, instead of becoming citizens of the world who can confront global problems together, the eclipse of the common world has instead led to the formation of the lonely mass man, incapable of action to preserve either the common world or the common earth. And this paper reiterates gestures of remembrance as an antidote to isolation and extension that herald a contagion of fear. So we think that we should repair generational bonds, social bonds, as indicated in the writing selected for the work. And in the end, I would like to thank you for your attention. That's all.
Thank you very much, Neha. That was absolutely fascinating. And in terms of how much you packed in the 15 minutes, I think both of you did a stellar job. And I'm sure the third speaker, the final speaker of the panel, will be just as interesting. The title sounds fascinating as well. This is Sharma, who's going to present a paper which is titled Contagion, Learning and Social Empathy. It's absolutely fascinating. Reading Indian COVID comics, Indian COVID comics. So Shreya, if you're ready, you could start your presentation. We look forward to it. If you'd like to share your screen, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Is it visible, sir?
It is visible. Please go ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank you for this humble acceptance of my paper and giving a wonderful opportunity for the little contribution and effort that I can make in this conference. So before starting, I would like to say that my area of interest is graphic novels and comics. And I have started recently exploring this area, and it found to be a completely new form of literature. And it provides a opportunity to experience the joy of reading from a completely new angle. The pictorial nature of these narratives makes them more approachable than the textual narratives and helps develop readers more sophisticated visual thinkers, and all the while engaging multiple areas of brain at the same time. So we always regard comics as children's literature, which are made for their entertainment, but they actually convey a deeper meaning on the intellectual level. So now they are considered as a genre in itself in literature. So if we talk about graphic narratives, then they are visual narratives, which in the form of pictures, images, and text juxtaposed together deliver aesthetic value to literature. And these open up scope for new space. And when this space is employed in healthcare and medicine, it is known as graphic medicine. So this term graphic medicine was coined by Ian Williams in 2007. And if we define what is graphic medicine, then graphic medicine is the area or field of study that explores interaction between the medium of comics and the discourse of healthcare. It is dedicated to education, patient care, storytelling from the viewpoint of patients. So, in the layman's language, if we are to describe what is graphic medicine, then it is the use of comics to tell the stories of illness and health. So in this way, the authors, they are able to articulate their experiences in an immediately engaging way. So if we talk about this conference, then it's about contagion. And if we talk about contagion and literature, then if we talk about this word contagion, then it can be used both literally and metamorphically. So if we talk what is contagion, the literal meaning, it means communication of disease from one organism to another through close contact. And in this case, it is about COVID and coronavirus. And if we're talking about metamorphically, then it's a social phenomena that contributes to the social, political, moral, and religious dimension, apart from the medical one. So new literary concepts about contagion are adopted and have been adopted in literary text. And this COVID-19 pandemic has given rise to various contagion fables. So it has gained widespread recognition in the realm of humanities in India. So we see that the comics such as Priya's Mask, Kids, Vayu, and Corona have gained widespread appreciation for their emphatic effect on the audience. So if we talk about Priya's Mask, this comic was written by Shubhra Prakash, and it's a testament in the world of comics to help people in unprecedented times. So Priya, who is marked as India's first female superheroine, She's on a mission to spread awareness about the virus and to stop its escalation in the city. She also makes Meena, the little girl, understand that how her mother, who is a nurse, is the only hope and help to those patients who are in need in these dire times. So the aim is to uphold and give voices to the subalterns of medical discourses whose contributions are often sidelined and evoking social empathy, that is, to survive with compassion for each other and give hope in these crucial times. So you can see these are some excerpts which are being taken from that comics. Next comic I would like to talk about is Kids, Vayu and Corona. It was launched by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare to spread awareness about the coronavirus. So in this, Vayu is a superhero, and we see how he teaches little children about the virus. He gives them the description, what is coronavirus, how it spreads, and how it can be prevented. So, in the face of contagion, the COVID comics have played an enormous important role in uplifting the spirit of psychologically isolated masses of our country and also raising an awareness. So, the title of my presentation, Contagion, Learning and Social Empathy. So it is giving message on materiality of pandemic, as many people believe that it is just a myth, but it's not the case. Also, the comics are focusing on the awareness part. It is making people learn about various preventive measures to fight the pandemic. So generally, this advice is given by medical advisory, but here comics are acting both as medical advisory through their vibrant visual illustrations, and also they are aligning with graphic medicine to act as therapeutic models, helping people to heal and to make sure that society remains in a light mood. So that's why their pedagogic significance becomes notable in Indian education system. So they will be helpful in bringing out good wisdom and awareness. They are acting parallel and analogous to medical discourses to spread education about the virus and to deal with the situation and to develop good attitude towards the society. So comics are at par with serious literature, and they're contributing in a better way and more meaningfully to social improvement and encouraging society to live with social inclusiveness. So here I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shreya. That was really interesting in terms of looking at comics, which is a little complex way of representing tragedy. But the point that you're making is very interesting, that comics should be looked at as a serious form of representation, because there is a lot of politics which might emerge from it. So that concludes the presentations. I think all three were absolutely fascinating. Jaya and Neha have been before at IIT Madras virtually. They've attended some of the memory studies workshops we did. Shreya, we're meeting for the first time, but I'm hoping she'll come back again. But I think I speak for everyone who attended this panel that it was absolutely fascinating. So I will very quickly say a couple of sentences so we can open up the floor for questions. So I think what was evident in all the three papers, and here I congratulate the organizers also in doing such a great job in chunking the papers together in a panel, because it's not easy at all. Sometimes it's a challenge to put the right papers together. But I think this was a perfect mix, because what emerged quite clearly in all these three presentations, it was a power of literature, not just to represent reality. That's something which we know, literature as an act of representation, but also literature as an act of anticipation. Well, that's something which I think Jaya's paper very clearly articulated, but also the other speakers as well, in terms of looking at literature as something which can anticipate what might come, what might emerge. So I think that's something that I personally take away from this panel, the ability of literature to anticipate reality, not just represent, but to anticipate what might come, which connects literature as a medium with memory in a very complex way, because memory is also an act of retrospection, but also an act of anticipation. It goes in a bidirectional way. We look back at the past, but also in a way which helps us navigate the future. I think that's something which was touched upon by all the speakers. So I congratulate all speakers for what has been a fascinating panel, and I very much hope that all three of you will go back and revisit this, and will look forward to expanding this and maybe publish this paper somewhere, because I really think you should. Okay, so I now open the floor for questions, comments. If anyone would like to ask questions directly or even chat in the box, you can write your questions through if you want. You can ask questions to each other as well. Yeah, I think there's a question from Jaya Watari. Please go ahead, Jaya.
Am I audible?
Indeed.
Okay, thank you everyone. I really enjoyed the presentation and how you all have tried to express these ideas around contagion while talking about literature. So my question is first for Neha. Because I too have read The Memory Police, and I wanted to understand how did you, and even Camus, so how did you and this is more of an explanatory question, like I'm asking for explanation and method, trying to understand your thinking as to why did you place Camus is very obvious and evident, but why did you place the memory police in the framework of Contagion, and how is it a part of it? Because are you trying to say that all speculative fiction, because you've talked about a lot of other works as well, so all speculative fiction can be put under this term of
Umbrella
term of Contagion?
Yeah, I don't think so. You cannot put all speculative fiction under this category, but as far as it deals with the birth and death of humankind as an apocalyptic scenarios, they are important when you're talking about contagions, because they deal with the fear of contagion. And also the memory police, particularly because in a lockdown scenario, as Jaya said, or whenever there's a contagion, there is a like new memories cease to be constructed or recorded because of the isolation. So in that context, the notion of memories being erased and that becoming a contagion is next level. So I give that. I mean, Yoko Ogawa is a genius in that sense, I guess. That's why I picked it up. Yeah.
Thank you, Neha.
Yeah, no worries. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
I just needed to understand, like, what did you think, and why did you place those two works together?
Yeah.
Questions or comments for any of the speakers?
Shreya, can I ask
Please go
Shreya?
ahead.
Yeah, Shreya, since I too work in the field of comic studies and graphic novel, I would also like the choice that you made for Priya's Mask, I understand, and the other comic released by I think Ministry of Health Affairs.
Health and Family Welfare.
Yeah, Health and Family Welfare. Why when you said that that comics should not be treated as just an alternative piece of literature or something that's only meant for children, when you see that it's when the topic pandemic being addressed in such a way in those the comics that you've selected, what do you think is how do you read it as a comic scholar? How do you bring out the or how do you highlight the politics of the pandemic within it? Was there any scope? Did you find, because I also analyzed those, and I was a little reluctant on choosing those as as works of study in my paper. So I just wanted to know what was your takeaway from your analysis.
Actually, I chose these comics because I wanted to highlight on the empathy that is being addressed in these unprecedented times. So when I read Priya's Mask, okay, I did not, this is a new field which I am exploring. I have just started it, and when I read this, I found that this is something which can be looked from, the psychological aspect as well, and not very much, but yes, a little bit, which can touch on these aspects and can give a positive message to the society and to the people at large, because comics are such kind of literature which can grab your attention, at the first sight, and not people might look at it in a very positive way. Okay, because we see children reading comics, and they are also comics which are giving some moral lessons. So why can't we utilize this piece of literature in addressing larger issues as well? Because they can address in, on a very intellectual level, on a very deeper level as well. So if we talk about that kids Vayu and Corona, then in that comics I did not it was only about the preventive measures, or everything related to medical aspects. But then in the last he says, Vayu, who's the superhero, he says that you should spend, your time inside your home with your family members. You should stay inside. So I think that angle can be looked in, how to live with social inclusiveness in society. So I chose these two comics. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. And just because like there are several other, if you could look at Malaysian comics artists, they too have produced their own their own you won't call it, they will fall under the category of probably graphic medicine, because the amount of information that they're sharing is in like detail. So I think that
Yes.
will give you a little more flesh for writing if you're writing a paper on that. Thank
Yes, definitely I will consider it. But I was looking it from the perspective of, Indian education system, how they can be incorporated in, as they can be analyzed through the pedagogic significance, how, so from the point of the Indian education system. But definitely I'll look it into that. Thank you, Jaya.
Thank you.
More questions for any of the speakers? If I could quickly ask a question to Jaya, if I may, is that okay? Could I quickly ask a question? Yeah. So I was fascinated by your paper. I think it's interesting how you're looking at a piece of literature which had anticipated something which really happened many years ago. But I was wondering, do you think it's a coincidence that all these works of literature, or let's say even cinema, whenever there's a representation of contagion and shutdown and lockdown, it almost always happens to be a white metropolis, right? And the whiteness of the city is quite interesting, which makes me wonder if there is also some kind of a representation of the collusion between, let's say, contagion and capitalism, right? And that's something that you can, because I was thinking when I was reading or listening to you of this Danny Boyle film, 28 Days Later, which is a zombie film, but I think it's really well made because it's also about contagion. It's about someone who wakes up from coma in London, and in that 28 days, everything has come to an end, etc. But do you think it's a coincidence that it almost always has a setting of a white city, right? Or do you think there's something deeper that one can perhaps unpack in terms of looking at the collusion between capitalism and contagion? It's just a thought, but I would be interested to hear your response on it.
Yeah, so when, like in the context of the novel, so it was written, like when, as Peter May said, that something like a contagion, it can, it was in 2005, the publishers could not, they even think of such a moment which could happen in which the whole capitalist system would be shook down by a contagion. And now when it was happening, they finally reconsidered it publishing. So it, even if for like a white capitalist city like London, if it is so difficult for them to imagine such a scenario, and then when it's finally happened, maybe like certain reinterpretations are then required on that level, that okay, so such a city which is full of economy and then capital is burgeoning right there. So at the heart of London, if something, a small virus could put an end to all of that, so how the other cities, how the colonized countries, the third world countries are going to suffer. And then I was also trying to work an idea through it, which is called the disabled city. So once London, a white city, becomes disabled, maybe then they get a perspective to look at their able-bodiedness, and then they might consider how the other disabled cities and countries have been working all throughout, and then how much more difficult it's going to be for those countries as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's great. Is there any other question for any of our speakers? Or anyone would like to comment on papers? Okay, I guess we can, in that case, we can bring this panel to an end, but I think it's been absolutely fascinating in terms of the kind of research which has emerged, because obviously looking at Jaya's paper, Neha's paper, but also, Shreya's paper. And one quick thought, this is a theoretical thing, Shreya, that I thought I should share with you. Because this is a personal thing as well, because I think one of the problems people have with comics, and one of the reasons why there's a reluctance to look at comics as serious literature is because of its superficiality. Like, it's a superficial thing. It's on the page. There's no linguistic narrative depth. There's no stream of consciousness, etc., etc. I mean, although that's a bit of a flawed thing, because it is possible to have stream of consciousness even within comics. But let's say, for the sake of argument, we are assuming, we are accepting the superficiality thing, that it is on paper, etc. But I think, I mean, listening to you made me think of this as well, that superficiality can actually be a privilege, can actually be an asset, because what it also allows the medium of comics to do is to create interfaces, right? And I think the interfacial quality of comics, especially when it comes to representing something like COVID-19, which is about contagion, right? So I think that actually allows comics to do something which the quote unquote normal work of literature can't, right? So I think it's time that we revisit the comics, the graphic visual narrative as something which is not just serious, but also something which is more privileged form of representation when it comes to representing something like a contagion, because it is superficial and interfacial at the same time. And I think the interfaciality of comics is exactly what makes it more privileged. So it's just something I thought of when listening to your presentation. But I would very much like, I'd hope that all of you will go back and work on this and expand on this and publish this paper somewhere. It's been absolutely fascinating. So with that, I hand it back to the host of the session, I think, Tejaswini, if you have any concluding remarks.
Thank you, sir, and the panelists for that enriching session. The next and final panel for the day, Contagions, Fate, Civil Society, and Identity Entanglement, moderated by Professor Prema Rajagopalan, will begin shortly at 3 p.m. So kindly stay with us.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.